evening and thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Nick Blumberg. Alderpeople are in the driver's seat as they take the first step toward passing a rival budget plan.
Negotiations are still prevalent. This process is not over just yet.
Mayor Brandon Johnson says he has grave concerns about the plan, but hasn't yet decided whether he'll veto it. Chicagoland residents, including Evanston Mayor Daniel Biss, confront Border Patrol Chief Greg Bovino as he makes a return.
Far from heading toward the abyss, as some predicted, we are on the verge of delivering a world-class transportation network.
State officials celebrate as Governor Pritzker officially signs a Chicagoland transit overhaul into law. Meantime, Illinois Republicans urge the president to reject a pardon request from disgraced former State House Speaker Michael Madigan. The city watchdog says the Chicago Police Department isn't properly tracking officers' disciplinary histories. And the Bears threaten to move, again, this time to Northwest Indiana. Okay, sure.
And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Rob Hart of WBBM News Radio, Laura Washington of the Chicago Tribune and ABC 7 News, Hannah Meisel of Capital News Illinois, and Steve Daniels, also of the Chicago Tribune. Thank you all for being here. Let's get right to it. So, Laura, Alders took the first of two budget votes today. They've got the second one scheduled tomorrow. Of course, the mayor has also introduced his latest revision of his budget today. Do you have any sense of where the momentum is here?
Well, the momentum is definitely with the alders who are in opposition. They call them renegades, which I think is great. You know, they actually have their own logo. They've created their own logo now with swords and bats and stuff. So they're on a roll, and there's not a lot of time to, if there's any negotiation to be had, there's not going to be a lot of time to do it. The big question is, they're going to probably pass something tomorrow. The big question is, will the mayor veto it? And he's playing coy on that.
Yeah, I mean, what's the idea there behind, you know, clearly he's coming out and saying, this is immoral, this is unrealistic, but not saying what he's actually going to do. You know, Steve Daniels, what do you think his calculation is there? Why the coyness?
That's a good question, because I think he's been defeated effectively. I mean, I think it's over, and I think it's been over now for several days, and so it is a little. I mean, it could simply be just setting things up for the mayoral re-election campaign to come. Mm-hmm. You know, I did absolutely everything. I introduced a last-second alternative. And like Laura said, the veto is the last thing he's got. I would be surprised if that's what he does, but who knows?
Well, he has said that he's not going to let the government shut down under any circumstances. And to me, that says everything, because if he vetoes, that's what's going to happen. There's not going to be enough time to get a budget done by the end of the year. So it looks like he's going to have to make that decision, but I think you're right. I think he's trying to figure out the political calculations and how he can blame it all on the council in line for next year for the campaign.
Well, you know, Rob, have you ever seen a city budget season like this where alders have been so openly in control of the process?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because 40 years ago, I live an interesting and rich life, Nick. As a result,
we always say that about you.
I found myself listening to an old radio broadcast from 40 years ago, December of 1985, and one of the news items from early December of that year was that the City Council and Mayor Harold Washington had arrived at a budget agreement. They admitted it was late, but it was in before the deadline, and they said it was remarkable because this was back when council wars were in full swing, and yet Mayor Washington and the Eddies were able to get a budget deal together a week after Thanksgiving. So as we saw last year, these budget negotiations go into December. What's remarkable this time around is the campaign machinery that has already sprung into action 18 months before we have a mayoral election. There's already an air war about the budget, and that is something I don't think we've seen before.
Yeah, you know, how about that, Laura? Folks invoking the memory here of the council wars of the 80s. Do you see any parallels, or is it not quite apples to apples?
Not really. I mean, the council wars was really about a group of white aldermen that opposed Harold Washington on everything. It was not about issues of principle. This is a clear battle between the ideology of the mayor and his supporters, feeling like they have to help the poor, low-income families, no matter what, which is a fine argument. But the other side is trying to be more practical and saying we have to make sure the city survives, the city moves on. And so I think it's really much more of it's political, but it's not political. It's not. It's about who thinks what's best for the city, which side thinks what's best for the city.
Yeah. You know, Hannah, you've certainly covered plenty of difficult budget deals at the state level, but it feels like, at least in recent years, they play out much more behind closed doors. They're not necessarily quite as public or as personal, perhaps, as it feels like. What's it like watching the process play out in Chicago?
Well, yeah, I mean, like in Springfield, especially in the last 5 years since we've had a new speaker, you know, there's much more budgeteering. It's always been a semi behind closed doors process, but you know, things really do not get done at the committee level anymore. But I will say, you know, having watched up close the 2-year budget impasse from 2015 to 2017, it is not a pleasant time to go through. And like, you know, if the mayor decides to veto this, you know, he will pretty much have used all of his political capital, and he'll have painted himself into a corner that's really hard to get out of, and to justify that. I mean, we also saw, you know, not too long ago, Democrats make the calculation on the federal level that they were not going to continue on with the budget shutdown in Washington. You know, people can debate whether they got enough out of that deal, but it's really hard to, you know, sell to people. It's really hard to explain because these are not easy topics, and when you talk about taxes, you know, you can get very, very lost and you can lose a lot of people, no matter how you're trying to sell it.
Yeah, and you know, the issue here, of course, with the federal shutdown is essential federal workers are still on the job. They get their back pay. When the city shuts down, it just shuts down. And to that point,
we've never seen it. It
right.
has never happened before, so we don't actually know. They could pass some sort of continuing resolution of some sort. Or
some folks are claiming they can't even do that.
Well, exactly. It's just we've never been there. But I don't think that's going to happen. I do think if there's a veto, it'll be overridden.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that the council, the ones who have voted so far with the mayor, there will be enough who will peel off just simply in the interests of the city, not getting to that crazy point where we would automatically have a credit downgrade if that occurred. I mean, we'll probably still have one, but we'd probably be into junk status if we shut down. It would just be calamitous, and I just don't think that's going to happen.
Especially because we've seen, you know, the mayor's closest allies, you know, even distance themselves, and you know, the mayor doesn't have very many like lockstep allies anymore. So I think that Steve's right that even if, you know, the numbers right now it's not veto proof, but I think if there was a veto, it would be easily overridden.
I think they won't pass the budget tomorrow unless say the alders that are in control know that they have enough to overcome the veto. And I think bottom line, whether he vetoes it or not, he's going to have to take the responsibility. Unfortunately, he's the mayor. He's going to wear the jacket for whatever happens. So the last thing I think he wants to do politically is be the mayor that oversaw a government shutdown.
Yeah, I mean, how about that, Rob?
Well, you also have to remember that this is probably the last time Mayor Johnson can roll the dice, budgetarily speaking, and get his agenda passed, because next year, is anybody going to stick their neck out during budget season with the election 4 months away? The next year is going to be an election year budget, and then everybody's up in March of 27. So you can call this a last stand budget if you want to.
Yeah, it is.
All right, well, the other big story this week, actually there were many, but another one we were following, Rob, Border Patrol Chief Greg Bovino returned to town just for a couple days, although the Chicago Tribune has now reported that he's already departed. Any idea what's behind such a quick drop-in visit?
You know what, it's very, you don't want to say this just because there are real lives hanging in the balance, and people whose lives are being disrupted, and some people who are being uprooted from their families and their communities and taken out of the country. But there is something very theatrical about all of this, that this is ostensibly about immigration enforcement, but a lot of it is about creating content. And you see a lot of social media back and forth between Bovino's X account and Chicago reporters who are passing along information, and that you get the sense from his side that a lot of this is a game.
Yeah.
This is about creating content and being a compelling social media figure, and you get to be the disruptor, and then everybody dances to your tune.
Yeah.
It's very theatrical, and he travels with camera crews, and it's all about the show. But it's also about, I think, about creating fear and intimidation and keeping people uneasy.
Yeah.
He's doing this right around the Christmas holidays. That wasn't necessary. He wants to send a message to keep people off guard. He said when they left that there was some indication that they weren't going to come back to the spring. Well, they wanted to fool us because they wanted to come back sooner to keep us off guard.
Yeah, because it's been a month since they, departed, and I think maybe for some people, people have been feeling more comfortable, especially those who felt unsafe going outside their houses, maybe selling things on the corner. I saw, a guy that, typically sells tacos and things on the corner in Albany Park today, and I wonder, how safe he's feeling right now. But to do it right before Christmas, I do think that I can't get in their heads, but I do think it sends the message that you're not safe here.
You're not safe anywhere, anytime.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and Steve Bovino thanked Chicago and Evanston police for their assistance. There was at least one instance where CPD reportedly pulled over a driver that was following immigration agents. But, is thanking officers, is this genuine gratitude, or is it kind of a poke at sanctuary cities?
It's the latter, and to the points that have been made, this is all about theater. It's about instilling fear, 100% there. The one thing that we would add or added in the editorial is that this isn't working politically. So we referenced the Susie Wiles interview in Vanity Fair, in which what Trump's White House chief of staff made a whole bunch of incendiary comments, incendiary from the point of view of MAGA and Trump. Common sense in terms of the rest of us. Sure. And one of them was about immigration and deporting, a mother with her children who was showing up voluntarily to an immigration hearing and things like that. And she was basically saying this isn't working for us politically. We need to do it differently. We also in Chicago have had some real horrendous crimes that have taken place recently that Venezuelan migrants in particular have committed. One of them was the murder of a homeless man downtown. Nobody seems to be doing much about them. They're staking out Home Depot parking lots. So all of that is, I think, in the mix here. And we'll see how long the Bovino show really goes on. I don't know how well it's working politically, really.
Well, and their rationale has been actually completely blown up because a lot of data has shown that the vast majority of the people they're arresting have not committed any crimes, much less horrendous violent crimes, and that they're being very completely indiscriminate, like you said about the vendor you ran into. They're just they're driving around looking for someone who looks like a person of color to pull off the street. And I think that offends a lot of people, and that's why I think politically they're not winning this.
Because, a lot of people would be on board with, the Trump administration's stated goal of, the worst of the worst. But that's, like you said, that's not at all borne out in the data.
Yeah. Well, Laura, I want to get to this. The city's inspector general out with a report this week on this really Byzantine record-keeping system when it comes to police discipline. It's spread across multiple departments and offices that don't necessarily communicate with one another. How big of a hurdle is that to these reform efforts?
Well, the police department claims that they really cleaned up their act and that the data that she looked at and the analysis is not really valid. But it clearly, I think, is disturbing given the fact that Larry Snelling in the leadership there is committed to the consent decree. They're committed to police reform, and yet that they can't even keep track of their own disciplinary system and make sure that they understand. Everybody knows where the cops are and the bad cops are, and so I think it's a big problem.
Yeah, especially that the consent decree's been moving at such a slow pace this whole time.
And this is just one tiny piece of it.
Yeah. All right. Well, Hannah, everybody's favorite former House Speaker Michael Madigan, currently behind bars, but he is angling for a pardon. How are Illinois Republicans reacting to that?
Illinois Republicans would be glad that anyone asked their opinion, frankly.
Touche.
No, but yes, you're right. Madigan has been behind bars in a West Virginia federal prison since early October, and he's recently made a kind of strange request to have a pardon, but after he's served his time, which everyone I've talked to doesn't fully understand that angle, but actually former Commonwealth Edison CEO Ann Pramaggiore, who was convicted in a separate trial for allegedly that Steve and I had covered many weeks.
Tied to the Madigan case and bribing Madigan.
Yes, for bribing Madigan. Yeah. She has apparently made the same request. So maybe it's a new legal theory that people around them are testing out, but it's interesting. But yes, to your point, Illinois Republicans, all three congressional Republicans in Illinois have written a letter to President Trump and said, please do not grant any sort of request for pardon or clemency or whatever. It would, bastardize the rule of law, et cetera, and which I think some people would find a little ironic.
Yeah, I don't get the pardon me after I'm out, but I'm not an attorney, so what do I know?
Yeah, I would think you would. I mean, we
wouldn't
don't
you
know
want
what
it
the
now?
law says. What does the law say on that? How can you be pardoned before you're actually out?
We don't know.
Right.
Well, just ask Henry Cuellar, who was pardoned before he stood trial.
Right.
This is a
preemptive
new
pardon.
world.
Yeah. But Madigan's appeals process, I want to mention, is still playing out, and I think we'll see a lot more on that next year. Madigan this summer hired a very high-profile team of appellate lawyers, and I don't know. We'll see.
And you'll be back in court covering
Sure
it, my
will.
friend. All right, Rob, Governor Pritzker this week officially signed into law the measure to keep transit from going over the fiscal cliff, to overhaul the way that it's governed. It's a big lift here. Funding and restructuring is going to take time. What are you going to be watching for during this process?
Well, first off, if I had $1 for every time the RTA, the CTA, Metra, and PACE have all come up with a doomsday schedule, I would have $3. But that's over the course of 20 years, because these fiscal cliffs happen every 5 years or so. And the most important thing for people who ride Metra or the CTA or PACE is that no fare hikes, no service cuts, things will continue as they are. The question is, though, is the status quo good enough if you are a regular transit passenger?
It doesn't sound like good news, really.
And what this can do is, first in the future, is say goodbye to the RTA and its cool 1970s logo. It'll be replaced by the Northern Illinois Transit Authority. The service boards and the people who make up those service boards are yet to be determined. And as the governor said, it's going to be a process to get this whole thing back up and running. But ultimately, you will have fare integration across Metra, the CTA, and PACE. And you could potentially, now that Metra has been unshackled from just the 6-county service area, you could see Metra being used to serve Kankakee by rail, to resume rail service to the Quad Cities. There's already a plan to run Metra up to Rockford. So if this thing actually realizes all of its potential, it could be good for transit riders. But if you're a transit rider on a cold platform waiting for a train that's late because of mechanical delays, you want some of those fixes right now.
Yeah, a little bit of a sense of urgency. Maybe they can get the people who designed the logo for the Renegade Alders to design the logo for the new agency. Laura, we've seen some back and forth this week between the CTA and the Federal Transit Administration over whether buses and trains are safe. And you wrote this week that there may actually be some points there.
Well, they're not safe. And to your point, people are worried about not just whether the train's going to come, but whether it's going to be safe and whether or not they're going to be attacked. And there have been some recent horrendous attacks. The Trump administration, the Federal Transportation Administration, wants to see more done about safety. They want to see a better plan. The city and the CTA submitted one this week. It got thrown back at them. They're saying they're going to provide more officers on the trains. They're going to beef up security, but it's unclear that it's not enough. But I think that this CTA in particular needs a little kick in the butt to get them much more aggressive about this. And the Trump administration is threatening to hold back hundreds of millions of dollars in funding. So they need to be listening to that.
Yeah, how about that, Steve? Does it feel like there's enough of a sense of urgency here to get this done?
Not really. I mean, I thought the governor had emphasized that there needed to be patience, understanding that the people who ride transit are not pleased at the moment by and large, and I wasn't sure that was the right message. I think, of course, it's going to take a while to really truly make the improvements that people will notice. But a message of, you know what, we're going to get on this right now. Yes, we need to fill out these boards and all this kind of stuff. We need to do all of that. But in the meantime, we need to act on what Laura was talking about. We need to make these trains safer. We need to, on the case of Metro, which is something I take, the trains are late most of the time, and not horrendously late, although sometimes, but just routinely 3, 4, 5 minutes late. I mean, there are a lot of people going back to the office or at least more back to the office after the beginning of the year because of company dictates, and CTA and Metro should need to be on the ball.
Especially because they've lost so many passengers, and they have not gotten anywhere back to pre-pandemic levels. And if they can get people to understand that they can get on their trains and be on time, that they can be safe, they're never going to get those people back.
All right, well, in the latest episode of everyone's favorite soap opera, Rob, the Bears are now saying they might have to look outside Cook County for a new home, maybe as far as Northwest Indiana. Okay, maybe fans would be fine with like Arlington Heights. Do you think they'll stomach if the Bears actually go out of state?
Bear down, you Chicago Bears. Well, the last time I was on this program, they announced that Arlington Heights was going to be their choice. And I think it laid out in great detail how one could drive to the Arlington Heights Stadium. So now, if you want to drive on the Indiana Toll Road or take the Skyway and get off near the Gary Airport, maybe you could go attend a Bears game circa 2040. Again,
there'd be a 400% increase in ridership on the Skyway now.
And just imagine, speaking of budget impasses, just imagine how much money the owners of the Skyway will bank.
What if we still owned that?
If the Bears are in Gary. Under the file of everything old is new again, 30 years ago, when the Bears were trying to find a way out of Soldier Field, that eventually ended with a big spaceship being plopped on top of the colonnades, they explored Northwest Indiana, and specifically a plot of land near the Gary Airport. And there was a graphic in the Chicago Tribune from 1995 that showed this is what it would look like. Here's the airport, here are the runways, here's I-90, here's the stadium, here are the parking lots. Here are the numerous toxic waste cleanup sites that need to be addressed before a Bears stadium would open in Gary. And then that was all she wrote in February of '96, and they moved on. Yes, the leadership in Indiana, the mayor of Hammond, Thomas McDermott, state lawmakers, the governor, Mike Braun, all very enthusiastic about bringing the Bears to Northwest Indiana, just as how everybody's enthusiastic to have the Bears. But when the rubber meets the road, when you actually have to buy land and build infrastructure and sell bonds to get this thing off the ground, that's where these projects derail. So if I had to put on my Swami hat, I would imagine chances are they're playing in Arlington Heights when this is all done.
Well, and Hannah, we heard from, elected officials, from the governor, who were pretty upset about this latest attempt at leverage, basically saying, we're willing to negotiate with you, but we're not going to give away the store. I mean, are the Bears putting themselves in an even tougher position when, if Rob is right here, when they decide to stick around?
Yeah, no, I mean, number one, I think most people believe that this is a bluff, but it's also an insulting bluff. Leaders in Springfield, the governor, legislative leaders, they've said over and over and over again, we will consider serious, propositions, but, we're not giving you, carte blanche of all this state money. And, I think that the Bears doing this, it does impact their leverage, and they don't have much leverage to begin with, and it seems like they believe that they have far more leverage than they actually have.
Yeah, I mean, do you think there's any situation here where Indiana just absolutely gives away the farm and gives the Bears everything they possibly wanted?
Not everything, but I will say, and we're in the bluff camp as well. I don't think we think this is probably going to happen, but I will say that we have other situations in the NFL in which teams are, when told to pound sand, like in Kansas City, are in fact going across the state line and doing something else. And we obviously have stadiums in East Rutherford, New Jersey. Right. We have stadiums in other situations. I wouldn't say it's absolutely not going to happen. So I do think there's going to need to be at some point some serious negotiation. The Bears, I would say in Springfield, has kind of been a little dismissive,
right?
And saying, hey, this is a very, very low priority. Well, Yeah, but it's still something you need to deal with.
Well, it may be a low priority for Springfield. You four are a high priority for me. You're a great panel, but we are out of time. So our thanks to Rob Hart, Laura Washington, Hannah Meisel, and Steve Daniels. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Tonight's presentation of Week in Review is made possible in part by Ann and Rich Carr, BNSF Railway, and Francine and Dr. Anthony Brown. Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation. Additional support is provided by
And that's our show for this Friday night. Be sure to join us for a special Year in Review program next Friday night. And stay connected with our reporters and what they're working on by following us on Instagram at WTTW Chicago. Now for the Week in Review, I'm Nick Blumberg. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy, stay safe, and stay informed. Happy holidays and have a great weekend. All right, the exciting stuff we could talk about with the Bears. What do we think is going to happen tomorrow night?
Well, thank you, Nick, my friend. My prediction is Bears 210, Packers -2.
And Dick is going to come on the field, and he's going to run for a touchdown.
He's going to say good, better, best at the end of the game.
The ghost of Walter Payton will ascend.
Yes, exactly.
Could you imagine how people are going to feel if they win tomorrow night?
I mean, that might actually win them some support for. All right, we'll throw you a little.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, wishing all a happy and healthy holiday season.